In a Beetle Bailey comic strip, the general has just set his mess tray down on the table, looks at it and says, "Grace, O Lord, for what we are about to receive, make us truly thankful." He looks at the tray again and then looks up and says, "I guess I'm not getting through, am I?" There is always a lot to be grateful for if you take the time to look. For example, I'm thinking how nice it is that wrinkles don't hurt. A pastor was helping his 3-year-old with her prayers. He was trying to keep it simple. He would say a line and his daughter would repeat a line. That worked just fine up to a point when he said, "Thank you for my many blessings." And she responded with, "You're welcome." Kent Millard wrote the book, The Gratitude Path. In it, he tells a story about his son, Kendall. Kendall was in the 5th grade. Millard's bishop appointed him to serve as a district superintendent. This meant that they would have to move to a new community. He and his wife sat down with their 2 children and informed them he had been appointed to a new position and they would move to another city. Their son, Kendall, folded his arms. "I'm not going to move. My best friend in the whole world lives here, and my school. I love my school. I love my church. I love my room. And for the first time in my life, I have a girlfriend. I am not moving." The parents explained that they were a family and they would all move together. It would be hard for all of them. Millard added, "Besides, we're selling the house." Kendall was adamant. "Then I'll rent a room from whoever buys it." He was determined not to leave his home and friends, but of course, ultimately, the family moved together. When they arrived at the district parsonage, Kendall and his father went to a large family room downstairs. There in the middle of the room was a large table with an electric train and tracks set up and plugged in. All they had to do was turn it on, and the electric train started traveling around the tracks. On the table was a large hand-printed sign that read, "For Kendall," from the Reuben Job family. Bishop Reuben Job was the former district superintendent who had just moved out of the district parsonage. Bishop Job knew how hard it was for Kendall to move to a new home, so his family decided to give their grown son's electric train set to Kendall to ease the pain of moving to a new community. Kendall was shocked. He said, "I don't even know these people. Why are they being so nice to me?" Later that day, a local United Methodist pastor and his son John, who was the same age as Kendall, came over to help unpack. Kendall and John became immediate friends, and they spent the day playing with the electric train and exploring the neighborhood. The next day, Kendall came into his dad's home office with his hands cupped, filled with coins, and plopped them on his dad's desk. "Here, Dad, give this to God." Millard was surprised because Kendall had never done anything like that before. He asked him why he wanted to give his money to God. Kendall shrugged and said, "Just to say thanks." He asked, "Thanks for what?" He said, "You know, the train, John, and my new room." Kendall had experienced some unexpected gifts and was filled with gratitude. He suspected that God was responsible for giving him these wonderful gifts, so he wanted to say thanks by giving some of his money to God. His father thanked him for expressing his gratitude to God with a generous gift. Then he asked, "How did you decide how much money you were going to give to God?" Kendall said he opened his bank and counted out all his money on his bed and then decided to give God half of it. Millard says he didn't tell him that he only had to give 10%. Their son realized that he had been given some generous gifts from God, and he wanted to express his gratitude by giving some of his money to the Lord, just to say thanks. The real motivation for giving some of our time, talent, and treasure to God is ultimately just to say thanks. Thanks for all the gifts that God has already given us. When we think about it, everything we have, everything we are, comes from the hands of God, our generous God. In our passage, Jesus and his disciples were on their way to Jerusalem. They traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As they approached a village, 10 men with skin diseases called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, show us mercy." When a person was discovered to have a skin disease in the time of Jesus, they were cast out of the village in which they lived. They could no longer live with their families in their own homes, work at their jobs, or attend the synagogue or go to the market. Instead, they had to live outside the village, away from everyone else. They survived by begging food from all those who entered or left their village. They also had to stay a stone's throw away from those who traveled along the road to ensure that others would not get the disease. They were also required by the law of Moses to call out, "Unclean, unclean," to warn anyone passing by. Luke tells us that the 10 men kept their distance. It was an ancient form of quarantine, but came with religious and social ostracism. They shouted out, "Jesus, Master, show us mercy." I suspect most people just ignored these men with skin diseases and pretended they didn't see or hear them as they traveled along the road to the village. But Jesus saw them. He paused and looked intently and compassionately at them and heard their request for healing. Jesus then told them, "Go show yourselves to the priests." The priests in the village would have to examine the men to determine if, in fact, their skin diseases had cleared up. The priests had the authority to allow them to return to their normal lives. Luke tells us that as they left, they were cleansed. Can you imagine the joy these men experienced when they looked at their hands and their feet and felt their faces and realized that they had been healed? And how did they respond to that healing? 9 of them continued running into the village to show themselves to the priest so they could return to their normal lives. They may have been thankful to Jesus for healing them, but they forgot to express it. But one of the 9, when he discovered that he was healed, turned around and ran to Jesus. He returned and praised God with a loud voice. He fell on his face at Jesus' feet and thanked him. This man was a Samaritan, a member of a religious group that the Jewish people of Jesus' day looked down upon. But he was the only one of the 10 healed men to return to Jesus and thank him for making him whole and restoring his life. This healed Samaritan is the model for what Christ calls us all to do. We are all called to become aware of the ways God has blessed us and to come to Christ, fall on our knees, and offer our heartfelt prayers of thanksgiving. God has blessed us in so many ways. Kent Miller did not grow up attending church. The first 10 years of his life, his dad was a practicing alcoholic. Kent was born in Hereford, Texas, and his family moved around a great deal because his dad would go on a drinking binge, miss work for a week, and get fired, forcing them to move to another town to look for another job. He also remembers many quarrels between his parents over his dad's drinking. Eventually, they moved to Faith, South Dakota, a small town in western South Dakota with a population of 500 people. His mother ran a cafe, and his dad drank up the profits. There was only one bar in Faith at the time, a municipal bar owned by the city. The bartender was the only employee, and he was also the sheriff. He would sell alcohol to someone until they got drunk, then arrest them for public intoxication. He would put them in the jail that was attached to the bar, and they would have to pay a fine to get out of jail. It was the town's fundraising system. Kent's dad was caught in that system. He would get drunk and then thrown in jail. The next day, Kent's mother would send him down with the money to bail him out. His dad was always ashamed of himself for getting drunk and thrown in jail. He would promise never to let it happen again, but a week or two later, they would go through the same story all over again. One night, the bartender/sheriff decided not to put his dad in jail, but to take him to a place where three men were meeting in a new group called Alcoholics Anonymous. These men took his dad under their wing. They took him to a ranch about 20 miles from town to dry out and learn the steps of AA. Kent's father says that he was walking across the prairie one day trying to memorize the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. The first couple of steps of AA are to admit that we are powerless over alcohol, but that there is a power that can save us from this addiction. His dad said to himself, "I am powerless over alcohol. I've stopped drinking 1,000 times, but I always go back to drinking." He continued, "Believe there is a power that can save us from this addiction." He thought to himself, "I wish that was true." Then he felt it. He felt as though he was surrounded by a bright light and a living presence. He fell to his knees and cried out, "God, if you're real, save me because I can't save myself." In that moment of total surrender, Kent's father felt the presence of God come into his life and give him a peace that he had never known before. When he got up from the prairie, he knew he would never drink again. When he returned to town and told his family he would never drink again, it came from his deep spiritual experience, and he never took a drink of alcohol the rest of his life. Then he said, "Now we need to go to church." Kent was 10 years old and had never attended worship. He didn't know why people went to church. He asked, "Why do we have to go to church now?" His dad explained, "We need to go to church to thank God for getting me sober." Kent was very thankful that his dad had become sober, but it didn't occur to him that they should go to church to thank God for making it happen. The people in that little Methodist church welcomed, loved, and supported the family. Kent was grateful that they had found such loving people. Kent grew up in that church and later experienced a call to ministry. He became a pastor in the United Methodist Church, then a district superintendent. Then he served 18 years as the senior pastor of St. Luke's United Methodist Church in Indianapolis. For the past 4 years, he has served as the president of United Theological Seminary. It all started because his father wanted to express gratitude to God for helping him get sober by going to worship in church. Each one of us has so much to be thankful for. The life we have, the air we breathe, food, a roof over our heads, clothing, our friends, our families. The Lord sent Jesus Christ to show us how much God loves us. We have our church family to love and for us to love. We have the scriptures that teach us. We have 2,000 years of Christian church history in which saints have shown us how to live. Our gratitude list goes on and on. How do you express gratitude to God? There are many ways. By giving thanks to God in prayer, wonderful. By participating in worship services online, or if it is safe in person, yes. By being generous and supporting the church's ministry, certainly. By volunteering in service to others, another great way. By being kind to others because God has been so loving and gracious to you, absolutely. The love of God shines down on our lives. The rain of God's grace falls gently upon us. And gratitude is the soil in which our lives grow to reflect God's love and grace. May God make all of us truly grateful. Amen.